They came from every corner of the South. Some drove for hours, crossing state lines on long country roads. Others loaded onto church vans and buses, their seats piled high with choir robes, tambourines, and the joyful chatter of friends who'd sung together for decades. The destination was Jackson, Mississippi, and the reason was bigger than any Sunday service or regular gospel concert. The church in Jackson wasn't just full that night, it was overflowing. Every pew was packed. People lined the walls shoulder to shoulder. Some sat on the steps, clutching programs to their chests. Others couldn't even make it inside and had to stand in the lobby, peeking in whenever they could. They weren't here for a concert. They weren't here to hear a famous voice perform her best hits. They were here for one reason only: Mama Mosie Burks. But this wasn't about her singing. Not this time. They came to say thank you. From the moment you stepped inside, you could feel it. The atmosphere wasn't loud or rushed, it was heavy with reverence. The first notes from the organ rose slowly, each sound deep and careful, like a prayer whispered into the air. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a regular church service either. This was something holier. The Mississippi Mass Choir entered first, robes crisp and spotless, faces focused in quiet respect. When they began to sing, their voices didn't just fill the space, they wrapped around the people like a warm quilt. It wasn't entertainment, it was ministry in its purest form. Then, without warning, the mood shifted. The music quieted, and every head turned toward the center aisle. Slowly, a wheelchair rolled forward. The room fell silent. There she was, Mama Mosie Burks, now in her late 80s, sat with her hands gently folded in her lap. Her signature white hat was perfectly placed, just as it always had been. But it wasn't the hat or the way she carried herself that commanded the room. It was her presence, calm, steady, and powerful. Without thinking, people rose to their feet. Some reached their hands toward her. Others covered their faces as tears rolled freely. The choir stopped, the organ stopped, and for a moment, the only sound was the deep, collective breath of a church that knew it was in the presence of something rare. This was the woman who, decades ago, had taken the song "I'm Not Tired Yet" and turned it into more than music. It became a lifeline for people barely holding onto their faith. She didn't just sing gospel, she embodied it. Her life wasn't polished or easy. She grew up in poverty, knew loss early and often, and walked through more heartbreak than most could bear. But she never lost her passion. She never stopped praising. When she stepped up to a microphone, whether it was in a grand church with 1,000 seats or a small revival tent on the edge of town, it wasn't a performance. It was testimony. Every note carried her pain, her joy, and her fierce will to keep going. She didn't shy away from telling the truth, either. She spoke openly about lonely nights, unanswered prayers, and the moments when faith was all she had. That honesty made her more than an artist. She felt like family. So when her close friends helped her to her feet at the front of the church, the room erupted. People cried out. Some shouted praise. Others fell to their knees. And then, in a voice softened by age but still edged with that unmistakable fire, she spoke. "I can't jump and shout like I used to," she said, "but I still have a praise in me." The sanctuary exploded. Some danced in place. Others clasped their hands together and bowed their heads in prayer. It wasn't the volume that mattered, it was the spirit. The people didn't just hear her, they felt her. Then something unexpected happened. Mama Mosie looked around slowly, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the crowd, the choir behind her, and the light filtering through the stained glass windows above. She lowered her head. Silence. Not the restless kind where people shift and whisper. This was absolute stillness. Time seemed to stop. For 30 long seconds, no one moved. Some thought she was praying. Others felt she was overwhelmed. But many believed something deeper was happening, that she was passing something on. Silently, as if she knew this might be her last time in that space. When the music returned, it was different, softer, more reverent, and every eye stayed on her. People didn't want to say it out loud, but they could feel it. This might have been goodbye. By the next morning, Shaky phone videos from the night were everywhere in gospel circles. Some showed her arrival, others captured her standing, microphone in hand, voice trembling but strong. But the clip that spread fastest was the 30 seconds of silence. One person posted it with the caption, "The moment heaven got quiet." Fans wrote about chills running through their bodies. Some cried without knowing why. Others swore they saw a ray of light shine through the stained glass just as she bowed her head. 2 days later, her official Facebook page posted a black and white photo of Mama Mosie sitting in a church pew. Head bowed, a gentle beam of sunlight touching her face. No caption. No explanation. It looked like a still from a documentary or a memorial. The post was shared hundreds of times in hours. People wrote things like, "This feels like a goodbye," and "That light looks like God's hand." And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the post vanished. That only made the questions grow. Was it an accident, a planned farewell, or just an image someone close to her wanted the world to see for a moment? Her family stayed silent. Her team said nothing. The gospel community didn't speak publicly either. But the quiet didn't kill the conversation it fed. Dorothy Norwood, another gospel legend, went live on Instagram and spoke through tears. "There was a lot of spirit in that room," she said. "If this is her last show, baby," she went out in style. Other artists began posting their own tributes. Tasha Cobbs Leonard shared the video of Mama Mosie at the mic, writing, "What a legacy. What a lady." Younger singers who had never met her shared how her voice had carried them through heartbreak, doubt, and personal loss. Radio stations joined in. Praise 100.5 dedicated a segment called the Mosie Moment, where listeners called in to share what she meant to them. One woman said, "I saw that video and started crying. I didn't know why, but something in her spirit touched mine." Another man said, "She didn't say goodbye, but she didn't have to. You could feel it." And maybe he was right. Maybe when a voice like Mama Mosie starts to fade, the silence says everything. Behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate, not about a tour or another public appearance, but about a project. Rumor had it that a final recording had been made quietly, months before the tribute. No press, no audience. Just Mama Mosie, a few trusted musicians, and one microphone. Her voice wasn't as strong as it once was. It cracked, it trembled. But that didn't matter. The rawness made it more powerful. It was gospel stripped bare, no frills, no filters, just the sound of a woman singing straight to the gates of heaven. The set reportedly included classic hymns, a couple of originals, and one spoken word prayer she had written years ago, but never recorded. And then there was one song no one outside that room has heard. It ends with her whispering, "I'm going home soon." No one knows if that project will ever be released. Some believe it's being saved for a formal farewell. Others think it was meant only for her family and closest friends. But just knowing it exists makes that night in Jackson feel even more sacred. Through it all, Mama Mosie herself has said nothing. No interviews, no statements, no social media. But that's not surprising. She was never one to chase attention. She didn't like drama. She didn't live for the stage, she lived to serve. Every word she sang was a sermon. Every stage she stood on was a place to offer refuge. And it looks like she plans to leave the same way she came, in grace, in prayer, and in quiet dignity. A pastor who saw her recently said she isn't sad or afraid. She feels complete. "I've already said enough," she told him. "I don't need to sing again." That may be the truest thing about her. She's spoken more with her spirit than most have with entire lifetimes of words. Her fans are struggling with the silence. They want to know if she's okay. They want to make sure the woman who lifted them through grief, heartbreak, and despair is safe and surrounded by love. And if this is really the end, they want to honor her in a way that reflects everything she stood for: truth, humility, and unshakable faith. Because Mama Mosie Burks didn't just sing gospel, she lived it, and even now, without a single word, She's still ministering, still touching lives, still showing the world what grace looks like at its purest. And so, maybe this wasn't just another night in a church. Maybe it was something we were meant to witness, to feel, and to remember. In that sanctuary in Jackson, it wasn't just about music or even about Mama Mosie's voice. It was about the spirit she carried and the way she poured it into every soul who crossed her path. She didn't need the spotlight. She never chased fame. And yet, the light always found her, whether she was singing 2000s or praying quietly in the back row. She taught us that gospel in just a genre. It's a way of living, a way of loving, a way of holding on. When life tries to pull you under, that night, when she bowed her head and the room went silent, it was more than a pause. It was a message without words, a passing of the torch, a final blessing, maybe even a gentle goodbye. And if that was her farewell, what a farewell it was. Mama Mosie reminded us that grace is loud without shouting, that faith is strong even when the voice trembles, and that love doesn't end, it just changes form.